Tonight, strategic alliance? The head of NATO in Washington trying to smooth over a growing rift between allies. And no deal. The Kremlin's preliminary response to a temporary ceasefire as a White House envoy arrives in Moscow and the Russian military gets the upper hand on the battlefield. Plus, ripple effect.
So this is the impact.
How Christian ministries are responding as millions at risk sink deeper into uncertainty without critical U.S. foreign aid. And feeling sleep deprived after springing forward? Tips on how to get a good night's rest that can also improve your heart health.
Set an alarm each night to remind you, just like you have a wake-up alarm, a go-to-sleep alarm can be very helpful.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A dramatic reshaping of foreign policy in the world of Trump 2.0. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm John Jessup. More of those stories in just a moment, but first, dozens of arrests after protesters flooded Trump Tower on New York's Fifth Avenue in a demonstration that escalated out of control. CBN's Michelle London has been keeping a close watch on the situation and joins us now. Michelle, this all centers on the arrest of Columbia University student activist Mahmoud Khalil.
Well, John, tonight at least 100 of those protesters are under arrest after a demonstration quickly escalated to a large crowd filling the Trump Tower lobby. And you could hear shouting, "Free Khalil." Many inside were demanding, "Bring Mahmoud home now." Many of these demonstrators are from a group called the Jewish Voice, and you can see they're wearing red T-shirts that say "Jews say stop arming Israel." The demonstration started earlier when hundreds gathered outside of a Manhattan courthouse during a brief hearing on Khalil's case. Now, after warning protesters to leave the building or face arrest, dozens were loaded into a police van, John, and taken into custody.
So what was the protesters' overall message?
Well, some say they're standing up for their rights and standing up for Khalil. Some supporters say his arrest is an attack on free speech, while others say this college student was abducted illegally. 30-year-old Khalil, whose wife, a U.S. citizen, is expecting their first child, is currently being detained at an immigration detention center in Louisiana, where he has remained after a brief stop at a New Jersey lockup.
Remind us, Michelle, how Khalil got on the Trump administration's radar leading up to his arrest.
Sure. Well, according to students and staff at Columbia, Khalil was an outspoken activist on campus. Last year, you may remember, Columbia was in the national spotlight after a pro-Palestinian protest movement swept across U.S. college campuses and led to more than 2,000 arrests.
As you mentioned, Khalil is currently detained in Louisiana pending a judge's order on a venue in his case. What is the Trump administration saying about what's next?
Well, as for what comes next, the Trump administration says it intends to deport Khalil for alleging serious foreign policy consequences. The Department of Homeland Security issued Khalil a notice to appear before an immigration judge for deportation proceedings. Those hearings are set for March 27th in Louisiana. John?
All right, CBN Washington correspondent Michelle London. Thank you, Michelle. Well, President Trump used his White House meeting with the head of NATO to make the case once again for controlling Greenland, an idea he's been promoting since his re-election. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte sidestepped the topic of annexation, saying it was outside NATO's scope. Unease has gripped the 32-member pact since President Trump suggested abandoning commitments if countries don't meet defense spending targets. Rutte praised Trump's leadership for dramatically increasing European defense spending and said the president, quote, broke the deadlock in Ukraine. Well, speaking of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin now says he agrees in principle to a U.S. ceasefire proposal, but noted the need to address what he called the root causes to produce a lasting peace. Those remarks coming as he meets with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow. Meanwhile, the war rages on.
The main thing
8
is that
people were injured when a Russian missile hit a civilian building in Kharkiv, also damaging a nearby apartment building. And the Kremlin claims its troops have driven the Ukrainian army out of a key town in Russia's Kursk border region. Well, the stage is set for possible military action to keep Iran from developing nuclear weapons after the regime's supreme leader rejected President Trump's appeal to restart negotiations. Meanwhile, Israel is shifting focus to Syria after a massacre of civilians, including Christians. Here's CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell.
On Wednesday, Ayatollah Khamenei dismissed President Trump's letter delivered by the UAE.
I think this is an attempt to deceive global public opinion. This means America wants to talk, make peace, and stop fighting. But Iran is not ready to negotiate.
President Trump has said there are two ways Iran can be handled: militarily, or you make a deal. Earlier this month, Israel and the U.S. held a joint military exercise, including a B-52 bomber, which is seen as a clear message to Iran. In the Oval Office Wednesday, President Trump told reporters no one's expelling anyone from Gaza. His initial proposal including the relocation of all the residents of Gaza so the U.S. could take over and rebuild the territory. Research suggests many Gazans actually want to leave the devastated territories and relocate to countries where they can live in peace. Egypt's opposition to relocating Gazans reportedly causing a rift in its relations with the U.S. The administration notified Cairo it will reduce military aid in 2026. Trump has hinted he'd cut off aid if Egypt did not agree to accept Gazans fleeing the war zone. Egypt receives more than $2 billion in annual aid, most of that in military assistance. On its northern border, Israel is carrying out military strikes inside Syria to eliminate a military threat from the new government. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned Syria's new leader that it's prepared to hold key positions in Syria for an indefinite time.
Every morning when al-Jilani opens his eyes in the presidential palace in Damascus, he will see the IDF watching him from the heights of Mount Hermon and will remember that we are here and in all the security areas in southern Syria to protect the residents of the Golan and the Galilee from any threat from him and his jihadist friends.
Katz also pledged to defend the Druze community inside Syria and said they would be allowed to enter the Golan Heights for work. Katz's pledge to the Druze comes in the context of a massacre of Alawites, a minority Islamic sect, and Christians by Islamist groups inside Syria.
In a rare diplomatic development, 100 senior figures from Syria's Druze community are set to visit the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights on Friday. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Well, new tonight, in the effort to cut the federal workforce, a federal judge has ordered the Trump administration must reinstate thousands of probationary government employees who were let go in mass firings. The judge found the layoffs did not follow federal law and ordered immediate reinstatement offers be sent. The agencies involved include the Department of Veterans Affairs, Defense, Energy, the Interior, and Treasury. The lawsuit was brought by labor unions and other organizations. Well, an abrupt change in President Trump's cabinet. Right before his scheduled hearing this morning, the White House pulled the nomination of former Florida Congressman David Weldon to be the next CDC director. According to the Associated Press, the Senate Health Committee canceled the hearing after it became clear Weldon did not have the votes for confirmation. Well, the Senate has until midnight tomorrow to pass a budget bill to fund the government and avoid a government shutdown. House Republicans passed their stopgap bill Tuesday, which funds the government through September. 60 votes are needed to pass in the Senate, meaning more than half a dozen Democrats would have to support it. So far, only one Democrat, Pennsylvania's John Fetterman, is a public yes. Well, Richard Stern joins us now. He is the director of the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. Richard, welcome to you. First off, the ball seems now to be in the court of Senate Democrats. If Republican Senator Rand Paul votes against it, as he said he would, that would mean 8 Democrats have to say yes to clear the 60 vote filibuster threshold, if I can just get that out. Do you anticipate, Richard, enough centrist Democrats will go along with that?
Well, that's the risk right there. And I think it's a good point to remember that even though people like to say the Republicans have a trifecta, the White House and control of both the House and the Senate, really, unless you have 60 votes in the Senate, you do not have control over the chamber. And I think Fetterman coming over is a good sign for that, but the other side of that is so many of these Democrats have gone on record saying that they don't care, that they want to shut the government down, that they view that as a way of stopping Trump making good on his promises, as a way of stopping DOJ from, frankly, uncovering the corruption that's going on in the government. So it's, frankly, anybody's guess when they're going to wake up and see reason.
You are no stranger to budget battles. You were the key person on the budget in the Republican Study Committee when you were a member of the House. If the Senate doesn't pass the House GOP's budget, what parts of the government would be affected by a partial government shutdown starting at midnight Friday?
To be fair, it's a little less dramatic than a lot of people like to make it out to be. So only about a third, really less than that, of the federal budget is even related to the bills we're talking about. And even then, less than half of that shuts down. Anything that's deemed essential, anything that's deemed necessary for proper functionings will continue to get funded. The military, things like that. Social Security checks will go out the door, Medicare benefits will be paid, etc. So really, at the end of the day, we're talking about a lot of grant programs that go to, entities that receive industrial subsidies and whatnot. A lot of these are, frankly, things that probably should be cut from the government anyway. But certainly governing by crisis like this is not a good way to go. And that's, frankly, why the president and conservatives in Congress have made such an effort to make sure we didn't get to a shutdown. And it's tragically why mostly Democrats in Congress see this as an opportunity to cause more chaos in hopes that they can profit from it.
All right, Richard Stern with the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for your time and your insights tonight.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Well, still to come, a desperate plea for help and warnings of starvation and disease spreading after cuts to foreign aid. We hear from a Christian organization praying for relief next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. Prominent former pastor Robert Morris appears ready to turn himself in to be arraigned next week. An Oklahoma grand jury indicted the Gateway Church founder Wednesday on 5 counts of lewd or indecent acts to a child. He resigned last year and confessed to, quote, moral failure after a victim accused him of sexual abuse back in the 1980s when she was just 12 years old. We will just die in silence. That's a warning from one of the many displaced people in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Agencies distributing food in an area affected by war say they have had to stop feeding millions of people because of the Trump administration's restrictions on foreign aid. They say they have no money to pay for fuel, trucks, and drivers to distribute stockpiles of food that are already there because the USAID payment system isn't working. Local aid workers expect cases of malnutrition and disease to rise. Well, joining us now is the Reverend Eugene Cho, President and CEO of Bread for the World, a Christian advocacy group working to end hunger. Reverend Cho, it's always good to see you. So if it was already a challenge to meet pressing needs before the shuttering of USAID, I've got to ask, what's it like now? How dire are things?
John, thank you again so much for having me. I think you framed it well. There was tremendous challenge. We are in the worst hunger crisis in the last 50 years, and certainly the dramatic cuts, 83% of USAID grants and programs only exasperate the current traumatic situation.
So Bread for the World is an advocacy organization, and as I understand, it doesn't receive taxpayer dollars, but you do work closely with other organizations who provide direct relief. So take us closer to what's happening on the ground. What are you hearing from your partners and fellow ministry workers?
Well, what we're hearing is just utter chaos and confusion. And of course, there's tremendous pain right now in places all around the world. But if I can just share a couple stories as a result of the cuts. There were 90 communal kitchens in Sudan, or the capital of Sudan, that were implementing life-saving feeding programs. And 90 of those kitchens, approximately about 95% of those kitchens, have been shut down, impacting, again, hundreds of thousands of people. In Bangladesh, 600,000 women and children have lost access to critical medical care. I can go on, and these are the stories that I'm hearing.
It sounds like a matter of life and death. I know this week you held a prayer vigil for foreign aid on Capitol Hill. I'd love to know about the response that you've gotten since then, but I want to also just mention this. I heard you give an interview weeks ago talking about the topic. You described yourself personally as a fiscal conservative who supports greater transparency and efficiency. Reverend Cho, can you expound on your position a little bit more? Because I think it may be helpful for people who find themselves conflicted between wanting to help those on the margins, the least of these, but who also support the idea of addressing waste and maybe support President Trump's America First agenda.
So for me, as a fiscal conservative, you're absolutely right. Transparency, efficiency are big, high priorities. I acknowledge that our national debt is a tremendous burden and is a crisis to our country. But I think folks need to understand that as it relates to life-saving humanitarian assistance and aid, this constitutes less than 1% of our federal budget. And yet the impact that this has across the world, both demonstrating our compassion as followers of Christ, but also engaging in diplomacy, soft power, as some might say, in the DC world is just tremendous. So I am a fan of more efficiency, more transparency. And I want to caution folks that while there may be examples of maybe not the best utilized grants, we shouldn't allow a small portion to give a broad picture of the totality of the transformative work around humanitarian aid.
Reverend Cho, we're going to have to leave it right there. Reverend Cho with the Bread for the World organization, thank you so much for your time. Still struggling after springing forward for daylight savings? Tips on getting a good night's sleep when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. Studies show springing forward for daylight savings increases the chances of migraines, heart attacks, stroke, and even car accidents, reinforcing the importance of getting plenty of sleep. CBN Health reporter Lori Johnson offers some tips on how to improve your sleep and explains how that helps your heart health.
To show the powerful connection of sleep to a healthy heart, the American Heart Association is adding sleep to its overall key measurements. It joins diet, exercise, blood glucose, body mass index, blood lipids, blood pressure, and nicotine exposure. Most health experts and institutions recommend adults get 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night with few to no interruptions. Bodies need that time to repair and reset. Cardiologist Deepak Talreja says these days most Americans get much less sleep than in past generations.
As our society has gotten busier and busier and we're all available 24/7 with devices that connect us all the time, most Americans don't get enough sleep.
Dr. Talreja tells patients the path to better sleep begins with the right environment. The bedroom should be dark, cool, and quiet. Then establish your best bedtime and stick to it.
Set an alarm each night to remind you, just like you have a wake-up alarm, a go-to-sleep alarm can be very helpful.
Stay away from electronics well before bedtime and silence them to avoid interruptions during the night. And if you do wake up, stay away from the smartphone.
We're tempted to pull our device quickly if we're having a little bit of a hard time sleeping and look at Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or do things that, one, introduce light into our environment, and two, rev us up instead of letting us calm down.
Exercise is also very important to a good night's sleep. Severino Tiaba now works out daily and goes to bed at 9 p.m.
Now, since I'm getting older, it's routine. You know, the kids are out of the house, just me and my wife.
Tiaba made a lot of other changes after suffering a heart attack 6 years ago.
My chest was burning real bad, and I had my wife take me to the emergency room because I felt like I needed to get checked out, and it just got worse.
That near-death experience convinced this beer-drinking, cigar-loving, junk food junkie to do a 180.
You know, I want to be around to see my grandkids.
Tiaba started by following Dr. Talreja's advice to switch to a heart-healthy diet.
I eat a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, a lot of grains. No more red meat, no more pork. So I eat a lot of cold water fish, salmon, mackerel, and poultry.
Plus, he gave up alcohol except an occasional glass of red wine and ditched the cigars.
The biggest risk factor for heart disease in this era is still smoking. So quitting smoking is far and away the single most important thing a person can do.
And while Dr. Talreja hopes all his patients try this hard,
he says I'm a miracle case.
He says those who feel intimidated about making radical changes all at once can take it slow and tackle them one by one. So while heart disease remains a major issue, taking this approach could mean a lot less of it.
If we could get the average American to eat better, exercise, pay attention to their other health risk factors, and sleep better.
So Lori Johnson joins us now for more. Lori, we learned from your report, sleep is a key indicator to our overall health. Science shows that you can't necessarily catch up on sleep, though. So what can we do to adjust to the time change and make sure we're well rested?
Well, what we want to do, John, is we want to train ourselves to wake up earlier and go to bed earlier. So when we wake up, we should go outside in the natural light, the sunlight, and even on cloudy days, because that natural light, it really helps us stay alert and awake. Now, as far as going to bed earlier and getting a good night's sleep, you want to stop caffeine at noon. And remember, caffeine is in tea, it's in sports drinks, and a lot of soda, and also, sadly, chocolate. So avoid those things. Also, you want to do your exercising in the morning and in the early afternoon, no later than that. Also, stay away from alcohol because alcohol is tricky. It puts us to sleep, but it also wakes us up during the night and we don't get a good night of sleep. So alcohol, very deceptive. We already knew that, didn't we?
We certainly did. Great tips there. CBN Health reporter Lori Johnson, thank you so much for your time and those great pieces of advice. Coming up, a rare new addition to Nashville Zoo. Next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, the Nashville Zoo is celebrating a rare new addition. It's called a clouded leopard cub, one of the world's rarest cat species, native to Southeast Asia. The female cub was born February 25th and is currently the size of a small baguette. Look how tiny it is. The cub's birth is celebrated as part of a conservation effort. Her father lives at the National Zoo right here in Washington, D.C., while her mother, whose name is Tula, was born and raised at the Nashville Zoo. A contest will be announced to pick out a name for the cub, and I think somewhere in the name should just be tiny. Well, thanks for watching. That's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow.